Welcome back to another video. This video is just explaining qualifying dependents, so qualifying children and qualifying relatives, so you understand in general terms what it means, who qualifies as a dependent for you, just to help to bring some clarity on your end. So we should have this in our resource section on our YouTube channel under as a frequently asked question. Okay. All right, so we're Leapers Connect Consultancy. We are business consultants and tax professionals. And this video is we're going to start with qualifying who is a qualifying child, um, as well as qualifying relatives. Okay, so just to give you a heads up, if you have a child that was just born, and you're wondering what tax year you can file the child under as a qualifying child, granted that they meet all the other requirements that the IRS has, whatever year they're born in, the tax year that matches that. So if they were born in 2023, whatever year 2023's tax return is filed, that's the year you claim your child in. That's the rule up to this day. If it changes, then I will update. But that is the rule as of up to today, January of 2024. All right. So if they were born in 2023 and you're doing taxes for 2023, you can claim them as a dependent on your taxes. Granted, they are a qualifying child of yours. Okay. And now we're going to go through the rules that the IRS has for who can be claimed as a qualifying child, right? So I'm only going to go through 4 of these 5 tests. So there's the relationship test, the age test, residency test, support test, and tiebreaker test. Relationship test is how they are related to you. Age test is what age is the IRS allows someone to be qualified as a qualifying child. There's the residency test, where are they living with you or not? Then there's a support test of how much financial support you're providing them with. Okay. There's also the tiebreaker test if there are 2 persons who are trying to figure out who gets to claim them as a dependent or a qualifying child. I will not go over the tiebreaker test because that's something we probably have to discuss in more detail, right? And I'll probably need more information from you to better assist. So I'm going to go over the relationship test, the age test, support test, and the residency test, right? Those 4 tests are crucial to figuring out if someone or your dependent is a qualifying child or the person's a qualifying child or dependent. All right, so let's go into the relationship test. In order for someone to be your qualifying child, they must be related to you by blood, by marriage, or legal adoption. So by blood meaning my own child. That's an example is my own child that I gave birth to would be by blood, right? Or if I had a child with someone, our child that we had that were related to by blood, that would be related by blood as an example of that. Then there's marriage. If I marry someone that has a child, or someone marries me and I have a child, they get to claim, or I get to get the benefit of having that child as my dependent through marriage. The other option is legal adoption. So if you have legal documentation, whether it is international adoption, where you adopted someone from another country into the US, or by local adoption, or local or nationwide adoption, where you adopted a child that's in the US from you, as long as you have legal documentation to show that is your child and that's a qualifying child, right? So it could be a child that you gave birth to, as an example of related by blood, a child that became your child through marriage, or a child that became yours through legal adoption. All right. So we just went over the relationship test. We're going to go through now the age test. So as long as they are under the age of 19, so from 0 years old, a couple months old, up to being under the age of 19 by the end of the year, they can be your qualifying child. If they're over the age of 19, they have to be a full-time student, for example, in college, and you're paying, you're financially responsible for them. So they can be under the age of 19 all the way down to months old. If they're born in that year, or they can be under 24 and a full-time student. Another thing is if you have a child and they have a disability, there's no age limit on disability. That's your qualifying child to the IRS for like there's no age limit. They can be a 30-year-old qualifying child if they're permanently disabled, right? All right. So college students can be your qualifying child, as I said before, like a 23-year-old, someone that's under the age of let's see, someone that's under the age of 24, so a 23, 22, 21-year-old full-time college student that you are financially responsible for can be a qualifying child. All right, so let's talk about the residency test. And the residency test, for the residency test, they must live with you for more than 6 months of the year. So they must live with you for more than 6 months of the year under the residency test. Some exceptions to that is, let's say I have a child, I'm here in, let's say, Florida, and my child wants to go to a university in another state. Because they're living out of state, as long as they're my qualifying child and I'm their full-time student and I'm paying for their, I'm still financially responsible for them, then of course they are still a qualifying child. So there are exceptions to the 6 month living with you for more than 6 month rule. I'm gonna pause the video for a second really quickly, and then I'm gonna get right back to it. It shouldn't be like a big gap. It's just that it's just screen's gonna pop back up on your end. So I will be right back. All right, so back to the residency test, just to recap where I paused. You must have the dependent must have lived with you. Your qualifying child must have lived with you more than 6 months. And an exception to that is college student who goes to school in a different city, town, state, um, and they live on campus for school purposes, and you are still there providing their support and they're a full-time student, then you can still claim them as a qualifying child. All right. Now let's look at the support test. So we just talked about the relationship test where they have to be related to you by blood. They have to be related to you through adoption or by marriage. We also spoke about the age test where they have to be under the age of 19. They can be from a couple months old all the way up to under the age of 19 by the end of the year. If they're over 19, they have to be under 24 and a full-time student. And then the other option is they could be completely disabled. And then we spoke about, what do we just speak about? The residency test where they must live with you more than 6 months of the year. And now we're going to talk about the support test. So for the support test, you must pay more than 50% of the support. So let's say, for example, we're going to talk about someone who has maybe a teenager. You have a teenager and they're about 17 or so, and you paid for, you have to pay 50% or more of their living expenses. So if they're working and they covered more than 50% of their living expenses or support, then you cannot claim them as a dependent, right? So you have to be, so you must pay more than 50% of the support. All right. Now, the next two things I want to mention to you are under the frequently asked questions category. I do get a lot of questions about this. All right, so you must have an income. You must have income to claim a qualifying child and get credit. So you must have a reason to file a tax return in order to claim a child to get the credits. If you don't have any income, it's just going to be a done deal and you won't be able to claim your qualifying child in the year that you don't have any income. Also, if you didn't have any income, it's very unlikely your child is going to have a tax return. And if and then moreover to that, qualifying child cannot claim themselves on a tax return to get a refund. So they can't claim themselves as a dependent. And it's very unlikely if they have no income that they'll file a tax return, right? So if they're your dependent and you have no income, you can't claim them, and they cannot claim themselves as a dependent on a tax return. Another notable mention I haven't had many of this happen, but I've heard of it, where let's say the parent may not have a filing requirement, the parent may not be a US resident, they may not have like a tax ID or so, or social security number, and they don't qualify to claim their child as a dependent on a tax return. Qualify to claim their child to get the child tax credit specifically, right? Because they're exceptions. If you can't file your child on your taxes, right? You don't have any income, maybe you don't have a social security number or whatever reason, do not give your child to a friend to claim them on their taxes, because here's why. One, it's not allowed by the IRS. Two, what then happens is if that person, depending on their tax return, they may not get a refund. And then there's an issue now with you and them getting money. And then if you have that child bouncing from person to person to person, over time, the IRS is going to see that pattern and disallow like any credits that those persons receive and take it back with interest. So I would say, based on the information I provided, follow those instructions to see if you qualify. If not, wait until you qualify. Okay. All right, so let's talk about qualifying relatives. So now we're finished with speaking about the qualifying child. We're going to talk about the qualifying relative. The best example I can think of off the top of my head is if you have an elderly parent who no longer works, they make less than a certain amount per year, they may live with you, you can claim them as a qualifying relative and get a credit on your taxes if they meet all the criteria. So an elderly parent can be that person. Another example is if that elderly parent lives in a home, just like if you had a student that went away to college, a child that went away to college. If that elderly person lives in a let's say a senior home, and you pay for that senior home, or for sure you pay 50% or more, no, more than 50% of the living expenses. So if you have that elderly parent, they're in a senior home and you pay for more than 50% of their living expenses, you can claim them as a qualifying relative or your own qualifying dependent. All right. If you have any questions, you're going to put it in the chat below, or you can send me a message and I'll clarify for you at my earliest convenience. I'm going to pause this video and I'm going to share with you. It's the link to this is going to be in the description. You can click on it, read it for yourself. And I'm just going to skim through some information the IRS has on this, what we just spoke about. So you see that I didn't pull it from thin air. Okay, so I'm going to pause the recording and I'll be right back. Right, so I'm back and this is going to be in the description. If it's not in the description, the video description is going to be in the comment section of YouTube, because I think that's where I'll be posting this. So this is an overview of the rules for claiming a dependent. So it's a lot of information here that you can read, right? So I would recommend that you take time and read it, but I'm just going to go through a few parts. Let's look over here where it says test to be a qualifying child, to show you where the information that the IRS has the same info, and just to go into more detail. So test to be a qualifying child. The child must be your son, your daughter, your stepchild, your foster child, your brother or sister, half brother, half sister, stepbrother, stepsister, or a descendant of any of them. An adopted child is always treated as your own. The term adopted child indicates a child who's lawfully placed with you for legal adoption, right? So just what I said before. These are the people that can claim, these are the categories under which you can claim a qualifying child. Continuing under the qualifying child heading, the child must be under the age of 19 at the end of the tax year, or the end of the year, and younger than you, or your spouse if you're married filing jointly with someone. They must also be under the age of 24 if they're over 19. They must be under the age of 24 and a full-time student, for example, a college student, and younger than you or your spouse if you're filing jointly. They can be any age with this. They can be any age if they're permanently or totally disabled, right? So if you had a child and they were born with a disability and they're unable to care for themselves and they are disabled by, you know, they're medically categorized as disabled, then they are your qualifying child with no limits in age, right? Here, it tells you what I just told you before. The child must have lived with you for more than half of the year. Here, it shows you the fourth test, which is the child must have provided more than half of his or her, no, the child must not have provided more than half of his or her own support. So that child can't be providing more than 50% of their own living expenses or, their own expenses. So if let's say, for example, you have like a 16, 17-year-old and they got like a job and they're bringing in like a lot of income and they're able to sustain themselves and they're paying more than 50% of their own support, you can't claim them as a dependent. You have to pay more than 50% of their support, right? There are other information here under 5 and 6. You can read that on your own. Over here where it says test to be a qualifying relative. All right. So they cannot, in order for them to be a qualifying relative, they cannot be a qualifying child, right? So they can't be a qualifying child to be a qualifying relative. An example, as I told you before, would be like your own parent or elderly parents. They didn't make, you're supporting them, you're taking care of them, and they live with you for the year. Or they were in senior care and you paid all their expenses because, it's not possible for them to live with you, then you can claim them as a dependent. Here, it says here. So it could be that the person either A, must be related to you in one of the ways listed under the relatives who do not live with you table here. So let's say, for example, the elderly parents didn't live with you because they're in a senior home, or they must have lived with you all year as a member of your household, right? The other option here, if it's not a qualifying child and it's, let's say, your elderly parents or so, or they must make less than $4,300 in order for you to claim them as a dependent. So even though you're paying 50% or more of their income, they must make less than $4,300. And you must provide more than half of their total support for the year. So you pay more than 50% of the household living expenses. All right. I will put a link to this in the description section of the video on, I think, YouTube. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll provide this to you so you can read it in more detail and understand. But that is it for this video. That's pretty much it. If you have any questions, let us know. Have a great